So for the purpose of the demonstration today, I'm going to use the 13.5-inch bracket, but it's important to know that the process for both is absolutely identical, and the lashing kit that we use in both cases in conjunction with the bracket is also identical. So I'll just put this 9-inch bracket out of the way, and I'll move quickly on to the tools that I'll need for this process. The first thing is I need a sharp pair of snips, I need a 13mm socket, and I need a 15mm socket. Now it's important with both of these that they're long net sockets, and that's simply because it needs to go down over a nut that may be on a bar, and to get the reach that we need, this is how we'll do it. So I will move along here and I'll open up my lashing kit. I don't know whether you've guessed it or not, but this series of blocks here is supposed to represent a chimney. Okay. Now I thought it'd be much easier to shoot this video on the ground, and that's why we're using this. But I am a regular visitor to chimneys, so you know, undoubtedly you'll be further off the ground yourselves when you're putting this up than me, unless you're working perhaps off a flat roof, which would be an ideal situation. So if we go through the lashing kit here, we have 3 edge pieces. The idea of these edge pieces is when the cable goes around the chimney, it stops it cutting directly into the concrete. The wire goes outside these, and it gives a firmer long-term grip. We have 2 U-bolts. These will attach onto the brackets, and they're used specifically to hold the pole in position, the pole mounting the aerial. And then the final thing is we use J-bolts here, and these are used in conjunction with the lashing kit wire going around, and they are attached on and used to tighten in the cable so it becomes tight and secure in the chimney. So the first thing I'll do is I come off and I unroll the wire, and I get, you might want to focus in on this, I wrap the wire about 3 to 4 times around the top of the U-bolt. Now it's important to do this because if you don't wrap it around several times, when you put pressure on, the rope might actually just pull around the U-bolt and could become loose. But because you wrap it 3 or 4 times like this, when you put tension on the cable, it actually becomes tighter and tighter, and it becomes almost impossible for the cable to work itself loose. Okay, so you can see this particular situation now. I don't use to use the snips or anything else at this particular point in the job, and that's relatively secure now. So the next part of the process is I come along and I undo this 15mm nut here. I take it off, and I'm going to slot it into the bracket. Okay, so for this particular one, I'm going to mount it this way. So I slot the nut through like this, I come back and slot it in. So that's securely in place now. So the next thing for me to do is I can work in a number of ways. I think in this particular case I'll work it around the chimney in this manner. So I put the cable over the chimney, I slot this in here, work the chimney around, and then normally I would use my knee to tighten this into position. Then, if you want to just come into a better location here. So we now have the cable wrapped around the chimney, and we now need to gauge how long this cable needs to be left before we cut it. So what we'll do in this particular situation is, I can see here that this is roughly where we want to bend the cable. Okay, so I'll put a bend in the cable here, and what we do is, we normally snip the cable at this point, but I don't even necessarily need to do this. I can just wrap it around once, that's the second loop, twice, and that's it. And then we just wrap it back around itself. And around a couple of times. And this point would normally cut the cable. Now, in this particular case, I'll just get a snips and cut it. I'm not actually going to cut it in this case, because I'm actually hoping to use this lashing kit at a later point on a real chimney. So we'll just leave it long like this, but you can see it doesn't take too much imagination to imagine that being snapped and just tighten back around. So now what we do is we shove this J-bolt into the lashing kit, and at this point if I let go of the lashing kit, it'll actually hold reasonably securely on the chimney. Okay? Now the next thing is we put in a series of edging brackets around, which, as I said, explained earlier, the purpose of this is to stop the lashing kit wire actually cutting into the chimney, which would both cause the chimney and also cause the lashing kit to become loose over a period of time. And you certainly don't want to have a loose bracket 20 foot off the ground, because they can be extremely dangerous if incorrectly put up. In general, when I go travel around, I see chimney brackets put up almost invariably correctly. But I've seen them in certain housing estates where poles are almost lying at a 90-degree angle to the direction it should place, and extremely dangerous, because if it works itself loose, it can fall from the roof down onto the ground, onto either material or onto a person. So you can see here, what I'm using here is a long net. Now you can see how far it is sticking out. If I was using an ordinary socket, at this stage I'd be in serious trouble. If I was using a spanner, which of course would work, it would be extremely slow process. So I'm using this bit by bit and tighten. Now I'll just push this bolt through, and I can tighten it by hand here. And obviously you should do it the quickest way possible. Some people use an attachment on an electric drill to tighten them in, but if you're up on a 2-story house working next to a chimney, you definitely don't want to bring up any more tools with you than you have to. So I would say using hand tools is probably the best way of doing it. It doesn't take so long. And at this stage here, I would normally come along and use a ratchet and tighten it in. Now, for the purpose of brevity in this video, I won't tighten it any further, but you would want to continue to tighten it until you've seen the wire tightening on both sides, and you can pull this and it's not going to pull loose. So normally, I would say, probably the amount that we tighten it in, we need to tighten it that amount again on both things, and it'll have the wire good and tense. Now, the next thing is, you have to want to fix on the aerial. So before I go any further, I'm going to take the U-bolts, which we have with us, and comes as part of the lashing kit. And this is used to secure the pole with the aerial onto our brackets here. So I just loosen off the nuts. I slot in the first U-bolt in here, and then I use this. Now this is why we need a 13 as well as the 12 or a 15 millimeter, because the nuts in these U-bolts are 13 millimeters. Now some lashing kit comes with, instead of a 1.5 inch U-bolts, they come with 2 inch or 50 millimeter. You know, it's much of a muchness. I would have a general preference for the 1.5 inch, because most poles you're using are going to be, let's say, 30 or 32 millimeter poles. So I would say that these brackets these U-bolts are a perfect size. So come along, and now I have the first, and now I have the second U-bolt attached on. The thread in this U-bolt is slightly damaged, that's why it's delaying me there slightly, but still it'll do the job if I'm just a little bit patient. So now we have an aerial that's fully ready to have the pole put on. Now in this case, I put on both U-bolts at the one time. If it was in a very precarious situation, you may not want to have to lift the pole up above the bracket and then slot it down. And in such situations, I would normally, possibly, put in the bottom U-bolt first, and only when I have the bottom U-bolt in and the pole secure, put into position, would I use put in the top U-bolt. But that's not the ideal way of doing it, but sometimes for safety reasons I prefer to do it that way. So you can see here we have the aerial fully assembled. Now this is totally realistic, because you would never assemble the aerial on top of a roof if you could assemble it on the ground. You want to do all of the work that's possible to do away from the chimney on a safe ground level before you put it up in the chimney. So we'll come along, I slot the pole in like this, you can see, and now I'll hunker down and I'll use a 13mm socket to tighten it in. Once again, you can see, even though I have a ratchet with me, I generally don't use a ratchet until the very end. In this particular case, I'm using an aluminium 32mm, 1.8 metre long pole. Now for an aerial, it's fine to use aluminium poles. They're much lighter, but 6 times lighter than a galvanised pole, and particularly when there's only a single aerial on it. Now if you had multiple aerials in terms of VHF and UHF, or if you had a satellite dish on it, I would say a galvanised pole is much preferable in such situations. But for this type of a job, aluminium is fine. And that is basically it. You can see that we have to, it's important what direction the aerial points. So it just twists it this way, you get the particular thing, and I would tie wrap it and run the cable down either directly to the television or more likely into the attic. We run to a distribution box to a splitter, and that's it from beginning to end, the installation of a lashing kit for the support of an aerial.